Right. So just starting the warm up. Feet below your hips, so hip width apart. And remember that the hip width can be slightly variable in the sense that you could have you could measure the hip width from the outside of your feet or from the midline of your foot going down that way, or from the inside of your foot, which is my preference. You just need to be careful. You don't want to be sort of out here and start pulling your knees out of line. I know we sometimes use the wider stance, horse riding stance, but then that is significantly wider and feet are turned out there. And I wouldn't even guarantee that from day to day, from week to week, I always take the same stance, or even in the course of a session like this, that it will remain the same. So as you get more familiar with Tai Chi and the feelings of the movements, and you have a sense of what you're looking for, you know, whether this is, you know, the looseness in your hips or feeling the movement in your upper body. And so, you know, you'll often see me, and I've seen other Tai Chi people, you know, you start off and then as you get feedback from the movement, you're sort of shuffling around a little bit. Oh yeah, that foot needs to be done, and so on and so forth. So it's a physical warm-up, but also a process of settling in, finding the appropriate posture to give you the quality of movement that you've become accustomed to. You're aiming to get your weight slightly forwards, and I'm exaggerating. You want to, my weight's a little bit too far forwards, it's more in my toes. This would be behind the balls of my feet, but you can hardly see what's going on. So if I go forwards a little bit, you'll see that I'm angled. And what we want to do is to neutralize that just by letting the hips slowly sink back and softening in the lower part of our back. So what that does is it settles your weight a little bit, it brings you more to the upright, and the softening in the back allows your pelvis just to adjust very, very slightly, so that rather than this happening, pulling you backwards because your hips are going back slightly, you remain in a good position. I like to think of it like that. I like to think of it like that rather than sort of just bending my knees, because I think if you just think, well, oh, I've got to bend my knees, then this is what's going to happen. You push the knees forwards. And a key thing here is the hips going back. You see, my knees more or less above the balls of my feet, which is where the weight would settle. So roughly speaking, in this posture, knees in line with the balls of your feet and hips in line with your ankles. So this feeling of overhanging in lower back and hips and buttocks, just very, very slightly. And look for that feeling of your hips sinking, being pulled downwards. It's almost similar to the feeling you get, you know, it's quite natural for us if we suddenly find ourselves high up, you know, maybe on the edge of a cliff where you've been for a walk, or you climbed up a tower in a church or something like that. And you get to the top and you get this sort of strange sense of being pulled down. It's a kind of vertigo type thing. So obviously for some people that's a really difficult thing, but for most of it, it's just a natural response of our body to this big expanse in front of us. And it's similar to that in that area of lower back and hips. So this should allow for the freer movement here. And that in turn allows for a freer movement in our shoulders. this is a key first stage. This acquiring a posture that means that we no longer resist the movement. So if I pull my knees back, there's a tightening here. When I turn, I feel as though I'm working against my own body. But the idea is not to do that. Then you just imagine that you're moving through water, or as though somehow the air around you is thicker than normal. We use this image, we focus our intent through that image, essentially to convince our body via the brain and the nervous system that we are actually in water or whatever, which means that our bodies will start to move differently. It sounds like a strange thing to begin with, but think about those times when maybe there's a bag on the floor and you just lean down to pick it up, and then there's something heavy in it. Oh no, I can't do that. You do it again and you move differently. It's just a natural response of our body to that resistance. Or it could work the other way. You assume that the bag's heavy, you go to pick it up and it's like, oh, it's not heavy. So it's a stronger, more connected quality of movement that we want to try and move in that way, regardless of the medium that we're working through. So we develop this inner strength in Tai Chi, and so it's the connections, very subtle connections in the body, plus a sort of a stronger sense of the movement, the energy. So when we're very loose, the feeling to me is comparable to just having a light breeze blow over my skin. But as the image of moving through water builds, then it changes, more like water just gently flowing over my skin. That's how I would describe it, but you might feel it slightly differently. So the movement becomes less random in a way. Your hands and your fingers are tracking a definite line through the air. A greater sense of connection to the center of your body. And if you now, just move back a bit, if you now raise your hand a little bit, turn your hands palm out and raise them. So in this position, they're fixed here. You're not gripping tightly, but you're just maintaining this position. So the arms aren't going out and back like that. And sometimes this is easier to feel that sense of connection in. These are all things that gradually become part of how we move. It's repetition is the key to this. Like with so many things that we do physically, whether it's some kind of exercise or just our daily activities, things change over a short period of time. And let your hands drop down and shake out. So the development of our posture in very subtle ways is always fundamental to Tai Chi, regardless of why we're doing it, whether it's for house grounds or whatever. Our posture is the framework, the medium through which all of that is done. And the more we can refine our posture, then the more efficient our body is, the less resistance. Like if you've got a bike or a car and you kind of work on it and you tighten it all up and so on and so forth, it works better. It also means that an awareness of your body is generally the first stage of training your attention to be within your body. It moves out from there, but as we begin to learn to focus more, then an image like moving through water is far more likely to remain significant. Now, just thinking about this refinement of our posture, just rolling your weight forwards and backwards in your feet, pivoting from your ankles, soft still in your knees and your hips. Just see if you can feel changes in your body. You might, for instance, want to just place one hand on your lower back. You may pick up little changes in the angle of your posture, like trying your hips as well. Becoming aware of those movements doesn't mean that we try and control them. They, generally speaking, and unless we train really, really hard on a particular part of the body, generally speaking, they are really difficult to consciously control. It's a bit like if you're going to thread a needle, or you're teaching somebody to thread a needle. They'll have the needle and have the cotton, and you go up, and actually it's too much. These very fine motor skills that we use for many everyday activities actually are very, very hard to consciously control. I mean, you probably could do it if you spent years sort of like trying to thread a needle. You could probably do it, but a lot of what we do in Tai Chi is about getting a sense for the movement that we make, what we want, and the intent is to instruct the body, do this. This is this is how I want it to feel. That this is what I want to happen in one way or another, and developing that overlap, that connection between what we think of as mind and body, so that they become very responsive to each other. But it isn't anything unique to Tai Chi, as I've just as I pointed out. Actually, we do this quite a lot all the time. So we can feel the weight moving a little bit. When we go too far, we tighten up, we fall around. We can also identify a central point, a point of equilibrium, which, as I said earlier, ideally is weight just behind the balls of the feet. Might not be working that way for you at the moment, but just a sense that there is the possibility of coming to rest. It's like, in theory, I could rest a pencil on the palm of my hand and keep it upright. It's very difficult, but it's theoretically possible. You can also just sway gently from side to side. So you feel the weight moving, and again, there are limits beyond a certain point. This is harder. The pelvis adjusts horizontally front to back in this sort of plane relatively easily, but side to side it's a little bit more difficult. So we generally have less movement side to side. But then can you imagine a kind of circle that touches the outer edges of your feet, combining the forwards and backwards movement? You can start to swing around. Again, you're working from your ankles. You don't want your heels or your toes to come off the ground, but it's a lot of trial and error. That will happen as you begin to sort of zone in, as it were, on the actual movement. Learn how to just slow the movement down a little bit. Again, trying to just stay very soft in your hips, your lower back, and your belly. Don't put your belly in, because that will also lock up your pelvis. Try the other way. And this time, rather than just going around the edge, slowly move in so that the circle becomes a spiral. And this can be a way of just once again identifying that point of equilibrium. And when we come into that area and come to rest, this is the state we describe as central equilibrium in Tai Chi. And this is something that we want to try and maintain, this quality within our body all the way through the different exercises. It's one thing to feel it when you're standing, it's quite another to feel it when your hips are moving up and down, your weight is moving. But again, we know what we're looking for. Our intent is to maintain that feeling, and slowly our bodies begin to in a way kind of work out how that's done. For instance, when we start to let our hips sink back a little bit more, then there are various adjustments in the body, mostly around the center of the body, it seems to me, that mean that I don't fall backwards. I mean, normally you would expect if I did this again, that would happen. But on these occasions, we again stop tightening up, we stop holding the pelvis tight, and basically allow it to get on with its job. Bring your hands around in front of you. So rooting down, dropping your center of gravity down, and then letting your body expand up from the root. Don't lift yourself up. If you imagine that the root is like the root of a plant, the seed puts down roots, and when the plant grows upwards, it doesn't lift its roots up out of the ground, it leaves its roots in the ground. So the feeling all the way through is that your body extends and then contracts, and extends and contracts. And that movement, if you think of an elastic band, when you pull an elastic band out, the whole of the elastic band extends. It's not just one part. In fact, if it is just one part, then it'll probably snap because it'll be old and dried out. So you can begin by thinking of this in terms of the muscles in the body, maybe the tendons, the ligaments, the fascia, but eventually all the tissue of the body, including perhaps the bones, just extending and contracting, a very gentle pulsing rhythm. This will lead us into a sense of the movement through the body, the flow, the energy, however you care to think about it. Breathing just comes nice and smoothly, but always with any of these movements, as you become more experienced of them, if you want to try and integrate a breathing synchronicity, I won't call it a pattern at the moment, then I think a good way to start with that is to, every now and then, not all the time, just see if you can match your in-breath to the expanding stage of whatever movement you're on. Not forcing the breath, and gradually this pattern of an in-breath as your body expands, an out-breath as it contracts, again becomes more comfortable and natural for you. This time, hands out to your sides. So it's not a massive error, it's not an error at all really to breathe differently. Your breath should be harmonious with your posture and your movement. And like with the aligning of your pelvis, much of our breathing is automatic. Our bodies know how to breathe. So we might want to sort of nudge that just to tidy it up a little bit. But we don't want to force anything on our body. So the wild goose. You see again the use of the imagery, slightly different image, this idea of the bird flying, waving a feather up and down in the air. Of course, the images can convey different qualities. This one maybe just a sense of sort of gracefulness, fluidity in the movement. And then parting the clouds. This one's not a stretch, it's again an opening up, an expansion through our body. Just as far as you're comfortable reaching out with your hand, but never to the full movement. And I think one of the attributes for me of the image is this sense of just opening out. When if you think about, if you've got a grey day, and then suddenly the clouds part and the sun comes out, everything seems to sort of open up a little bit. And so the exercise does actually help with that. And do one more, and then go back to the first one and linking the movements up in a little sequence. And as you do this first one, just feel the expansion in your belly, and then you change to wild goose and expand in belly, and then the solar plexus, and then from here belly, solar plexus, and then the upper part of the chest. And that direction of expansion from belly to solar plexus to chest would also match our most basic and most important breathing method, sometimes referred to as bellows breathing, where the body expands in the belly and solar plexus drawing the air down into the lungs. So again, if it suits you to work with the breathing, you can use this exercise. Don't bother with thinking about your breath on the first two stages. Just concentrate on that feeling of movement within your body. But then, again, if it suits, just see how the in-breath feels here. It may not last as long as the movement. It may last longer, it's fine. Gradually learning to focus our attention on particular patterns within the body. This sequence, these movements, generally work with the whole of the body, but again, we may just focus on the belly here, but you can also feel it through the rest of your body. So we begin to learn to focus our intent without it being a strain. So now when we switch to Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky, our attention goes to one side of the body. We push up, that's the elastic band opening up and then drawing down. Your hand come all the way down. Your attention move to the other side of your body, push up. So what first looks as those three stages to the movement, two stages to the movement, I beg your pardon, is in fact three stages. There's an expansion and contraction on one side. And then there's an expansion and contraction on the other side. But between the two, there's a shifting of your attention from one side, maybe one foot to the other, or maybe the whole of the side of your body, which we don't want to rush. So if you think about, if you watch a documentary, the camera's slowly panning across the landscape. It's not from one side, it doesn't go from one end to another abruptly. You just pan your attention across. Just take a little bit more time and space to move in. It's not a race. It's not a rush. And so once again, There's a benefit to our minds just leaving behind that sort of urge to multitask, to rush to the next stage. And a very deep sort of calmness can build from that. And that too helps this generation of the very fluid quality of the movement within our bodies. Body and mind are not separate, and if your mind's a bit agitated, then you can feel restless, or vice versa. Do one more on each side. Tai Chi is often described as natural movement, and it doesn't always seem that way to start off with. Bring your hands to your sides and then around, let your hips hang back, don't go up and down, just the first and the last stages of this. All of these things that come out of that mind-body relationship, the use of our intent, in a way, the transfer of agitation or calmness between mind and body and mind, are all common human traits, it seems. If you go to a theatre or to a cinema and the seats are uncomfortable, for one reason or another, and somebody says to you later, "What was the film like?" So, "Oh, the film was quite good, but it was hard to concentrate because I couldn't quite get comfortable. You're shuffling around," and so on and so forth. So the one will always influence the others. It's not mind over matter. Now add in the turning movement. The turning is in your hips. It's not a very big turn. As you push out, your hands will move further, of course, because they're pushing out. And always coming back to this position. It's very common to find ourselves missing that bit of it. So we focus on the outward movement, but not on the inward movement. So for instance, it's quite common to find ourselves getting here and then coming down a little bit and shooting into the next stage. But make sure you do finish each movement. Just reminding yourself of that quieter, stiller quality that ideally we want to really pervade the whole movement, but which may well get lost. And so we just recover it here at these stages of what's sometimes referred to as punctuation. Come around. Now, let your hands come down. Expanding on one side again, this time letting the movement push your arm out. So we have this constant rhythm running through the body. Remember, your hips are dropping back. So whether they're going up and down or not, there's still the downward movement, and the response from your body is an upward movement. So there's still that process of expansion and contraction taking place. This time, if it's comfortable, add in the turn. Once again, we use our intent. So far, all of the movements that we've done in this session have come from the same posture. It's just that we've chosen different shapes to let our body flow into. Switch sides. So obviously, the more familiar you are with the pattern, the exercise, the shape, the more effective that's going to be. And again, if it's comfortable, just add in the turn. Letting your hands just hang down by your body. Go back to this sinking down and pushing up. So this really sort of builds on that idea of a downward and an upward movement working through your body. Pelvis is level, keeping your shoulders and your head upright. This time, as you sink down, push your hips back. Be careful of your back and your knees. And this tilts your upper body forwards, and then you let your hips drop back and push up. So don't think of extending, don't think of leaning forwards, think of your hips going back. And then your arms following over and down, rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. So we begin to extend out and forwards a little bit, not by straining to go forwards, but rather just by a gentle movement of our hips backwards. So we begin to understand with this and the next exercise how it happens many times in our day when we extend forwards, or you lean forwards to do the washing up or to reach something on the table or something like that. We've all experienced sort of a bit of tightness or stiffness, I'm sure, in those moments. When we get used to using our hips in the center of our body in this way, we begin to find a different way of making those movements. And then still using that same idea, hands in front of you, but turn a little bit. Push your hips back and swing around. Back the other way. polishing the table. One more time. And stand. Shake it up. So one important element in this whole art is that we recognize that we picked up habits of movement through the years for all sorts of reasons. It may be to do with the work that we've done, maybe there's been an illness or an injury, maybe it's just, you know, we haven't thought about it, or, you know, we've been told things and so on and so forth. And those habits aren't going to go away easily. So if you ever try to break any kind of habit, then actually the best way of doing it seems to be not to concentrate on the habit and how you can stop doing it, but rather to develop more positive habits. And I think this is what happens, that, you know, we have our standard way of moving around here, and then, you know, Tai Chi comes in from the side and we develop new habits, and slowly those older habits will begin to go away. So eventually you can get to a point where you know, there's something on the table and you want to reach it, and rather than doing this, which is pulling me out of line, you'll tend to do that. You'll feel your hips dropping back more. You're not going to go into the full exercise, but just this slow change takes place with practice. Of course, it's the practice that makes the difference there. So changing the stance to the bow stance. So here, turn one foot out. You can play about with that angle. Some people have it right out. You don't want it right out there, but anything between something like 45 degrees and almost nothing really, depending on what suits you. Notice that my feet are still hip width apart. See where my foot is pointing, and when I step forwards on that line. I don't go to here, I go to there, and I keep my toes pointing forwards. And then just transferring my weight forwards and backwards. Ideally, your shoulders and your hips will face straight forwards. You may find there's a slight turn there. If you can correct that without straining, then by all means do so. But what you may find is, for instance, commonly we just twist around and your feet will change in the back, or sometimes it twists the knees around. So if that's what's happening, then sometimes I'll talk about, you know, how to correct those. But for the moment, just put up with being slightly offline. It's not the end of the world if that happens. More importantly is to think of how you're moving. And again, another habit we have, with good reason in fact, is that we tend to lead with our shoulders. And that's a good way of just ordinary walking around. But if it's taken too far, obviously we can become very unstable. We want to regain a sense of moving from our bodies. So I'll just show you something. If I put these books, yeah, there's a few books there, you can see that. So see what I've just done, I've pushed them forward with my foot. So if I want to move those books and I just push on the top book, that's what happens, they all fall over. But if I use the lowest one and push that, they stay in the stack. So it's kind of common sense really, isn't it? But we want to remember to use our legs. So, you know, when you go into the back leg, you sink down, and this is really exaggerated. You wouldn't normally see the movement. It's something that you feel, but it's almost like you've gone down here and then you push yourself forwards. You don't go up, you go forwards. So, you know, there, and then it's pushing back. And with practice, your legs will develop a springy quality. Muscles, the tendons, the ligaments are largely responsible for that, and they will build in time. Again, you can use an image like moving through water to start off with. You know, the phrase that we use, our body sits on the hip. That implies that the upper part of the body is passive, which is, again, a good starting point. But if we use that image of moving through water, if I was in my back leg and I was in water and I pushed myself forwards, if I did nothing at all, there's no change in the upper part of my body, this would happen. The pressure of the water would push my shoulders back. So again, using that image will make you become aware, help you to become aware of little changes within the body as your upper body responds to that movement in the lower part of your body. When you go into your back foot, begin to raise your toes and then your heel. When you raise your toes, it's simply your ankle flexing. For your heel to come up, push your knee forwards, and that does that. So think of it like that rather than leaning backwards or leaning forwards. And use the extra bit of space that gives you to just get a bit more weight going into your feet until you can just bring your foot in. So once again, we have a movement where it looks like there's sort of two stages. The weight goes forwards, the weight goes back. But actually, the weight goes forward and settles into the front foot. The weight goes back and settles into the back foot. Just that little moment of almost resting. Again, a punctuation point in the movement. Try on the other side. Start with the parallel stance, turn the other foot out, step through. So again, with experience, you'll become aware of, or feel like kind of hidden movements within the overall movement that I felt rather than seen. Kind of settling. And again, this quality of the stillness within the movement and the benefit of that for our minds and our general well-being are hugely important. They provide a pause, a break between stages. And again, this is something that we begin to develop habitually, that ability to just for a moment to settle before we move off and do something. Perhaps it's the equivalent of, saying, we always say, if you're going to lose your temper, count to 10. Just to provide that break in a situation. And then raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. Again, this is not our normal way of walking, our sort of everyday walking, but is a part of how we need to think about our walking. Your foot coming in is just your leg contracting inwards and then going out, expanding outwards. This time, bring your foot in, let it swing forward and out to the side to get back to hip width. Lower the heel, then the toes. Notice my foot is slightly turned out as I go forwards, so my weight more easily goes through into my foot. So you're not walking in a straight line. There's a straight line running down the middle, but you're stepping from one side to another. And then going back. This is a lovely exercise because many of those qualities that I'm talking about, the stillness, the way that our posture relates to our movement, the focus of attention are present in a very, very simple exercise. There will always be a few wobbles. It's not meant to be an exercise in standing on one leg and perfect posture or anything like that. When you get those wobbles, actually, it can be quite useful to have the wobble, because you get there, think, oh, I'm about to fall over. And normally we just sort of flap our arms about, but there's nothing there to hold on to. Much better if we can remember to do this. See how my hips have dropped back, going from here, I'm about to fall, oops. That's what's going on. So there, I get to there, I can just drop down. I can just find that kind of steady position. And if that's difficult for you, it is difficult. It's counterintuitive. Effectively, we relax. I recommend to people do the walking with a wall next to you, because it's hard to relax if you think you're going to fall over. So if you do feel that little bit of a wobble, you can even do it deliberately, as I'm doing. You do that, just put your fingers on the wall to stabilize yourself, and then see what happens. Can you get that? And that way you'll begin to appreciate what's going on and be much more confident in doing that. Now, have your right foot forwards. Okay, so we build up the exercises from this posture, using that movement, that flow through the body to move our arms. And what we want to do is start in the back foot, hands down, see my arms falling down, more or less in line with my hip. And as I go forward, the pressure of the water holds my arms back, and then they flow through. Sinking back, and you want your hands to swing past your hips as you settle into the foot. The rest of the time they're being pulled. This is fisherman castanet. It's a great exercise to really feel that, again, that connection and strength that works through the whole of the body, led by the movement of your weight. We begin to feel the movement, the momentum building into our arms. And again, we have this idea, casting the net, like you're throwing something out in front of you. If you haven't thrown very many nets around, which I have to admit I haven't, maybe sort of think about rolling a carpet out on the floor or throwing a sheet over a bed. Find a function that you're familiar with, that you can imagine easily, and your body will just begin to move as though it's performing that function. So we get this lovely wave-like quality of movement flowing through our bodies. One more time. And then this time the wave, pushing your body forwards, pushing your arms out a little bit so that they swing up. This is pushing wave. Sometimes called pushing a wave. So you could think of this in two ways. You could think that you're pushing against water, pushing against the wave. You can also feel as though the wave is doing the pushing. And again, eventually you'll find that if you switch between those two images, eventually the effect of both will be felt in your body. Both of these movements, I'm using the same posture, facing forwards as much as possible, as I said earlier. This time, when you go back, you let your hands come down, but you turn in the direction of your back foot, so your hands swing down to your hips. They swing up, feeling expansion on that rear side of your body, and then down forwards into the front foot, feel the expansion on that side of the body and back down. So we've got a combination here of your weight moving, your center of your body turning to redirect your arms, that pulsing rhythm of expansion and contraction working through your body, and a relatively simple shape. It's like an infinity sign, or you prefer a kind of sideways figure of 8 movement. And again, you know, we learn to combine all these different elements in time. And shake out. With movements like that, it's very easy to start sort of flap your arms around. The image of moving through water is a really good one, a really useful one to help avoid that, because if you were in water and you tried to flap your arm, you wouldn't be able to do it because the water's too dense. You'd have to move differently. So the other foot forward, make sure of your stance, fisherman cast the net. Going back to breathing, if that's of interest to you. With this one, what we want to think of is, as we go back, we breathe in, and it's as though our body fills up like a balloon, or like a pair of bellows that you might pump a fire with. And then when you breathe out, it's like you're breathing out through your arms. So that's a little bit more difficult to maintain. Try it once or twice if it suits you, but don't feel you have to keep to it. It can help to link up the different aspects of the movement if it's working for you. Somebody once said that our breath provides the bridge, the link between body and mind. I don't think that's true for everybody though, but if it's true for you, it's a useful tool. And then pushing wave, pushing a wave. Even that concept of energy, which can feel quite exotic in Tai Chi, is just a normal thing for the body. We know that there are various energetic processes within our body: movement, breathing, biochemical, bioelectrical, biophysical energy, in all sorts of ways. You know, we eat food to gain energy. We breathe oxygen to produce energy. So when the movement becomes very subtle, it's not unreasonable to think in terms of energy flowing through the body, and that we want that energy to have a very smooth, harmonious quality. This time, turning back. And as much as possible, keeping your hands with your palms facing into the direction of the movement. So they'll rotate at a certain point. Your hands move at the pace set by the transfer of your weight and the turning of your center, not the other way around. And remember that moment of settling into your leg. Here, moving the weight and then settling here as you turn. So this time, as you settle, also raise your back heel, bring the foot in, step through. You can either keep the foot up in the air, or sometimes if I'm wobbling around, you'll see me put my toes down for that little bit of extra stability. Now, going backwards. And see if you can just feel that here, as my hands come up, my toes come up, my foot comes in. As my hands go down, so does my foot. And bring your feet parallel. Now that last little exercise is quite a useful one. If you've got limited space, you can do as many steps as you wish. You can also go in whatever direction. I did it forwards and backwards facing the camera, but I could have done this to here, to here. Move around so you can play around with directions. Just keep the movement going. Keep that image of moving through water. It's a very adaptable exercise, that one. Lovely. So just rubbing your hands together again. Tapping over your face. Hands of your fingers. And then the palms of your hands over your head, down to your neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. Other side. Lower part of your back. If this isn't comfortable, just use one hand, perhaps swap over every now and then. But in the end, if it's still uncomfortable, then I'll suggest leaving it. And then around your hips. Nice and light on your belly. Chest. And shake out. So Embrace Tiger Return to Mountain offers us an insight into, in a way, part of the rhythm of Tai Chi. The extension and the contraction. It's very easy to lose the sense of being centered, rooted, that quietness and that calmness when we reach out. In that sense, the name of the movement, Embracing Tiger, tiger is sometimes said to represent daily life. The return to the mountain is that I talked about these little punctuation points, these moments when we just recover a sense of being centered, of being still. And so when we do the exercise, we learn that we can recover these little moments. And one way to think of this is that there is something that brings you back. So as you get to know the exercise, it might be the image of the mountain, it might be the pull of gravity through your body, it might be the breath, or whatever. It's a very personal thing, but think about what you might like to be able to remember. If you go out and you go shopping and there's lots of people in the shop and it gets very hectic, what would you like to think about just to for that moment? That same moment is here when we settle into the ground. What's most useful to you to take out of the session with you? So just sinking down and pushing up. You don't have to do a breathing pattern all the way through. What you could do is here, just take a breath in as you draw your hands in. So now the out breath comes naturally as you sink down. And it's that return to the mountain. It is embracing the tiger. So here, just registering, remembering, noticing what brings you back to the mountain. Last time. Just standing. So one really useful habit that we do build is this habit of coming back to the mountain. It becomes part of how we go through life in the end. It takes practice, but it's very possible. Thank you very much, everybody.